In the winter of 1856, in a forgotten pocket of southeastern Ohio, 3 boys were born into a world that would have been better off never knowing them. Not because they were monstrous, not exactly, but because what they carried inside them was the kind of truth that ruins people. The kind that, once you've glimpsed it, makes ordinary life feel like a slow performance of lies you can no longer stomach. Their mother was a woman who called herself Ruth, though that was almost certainly not her name. She arrived at the Quaker meeting house in Cedar Mills 3 days before her body forced the issue, 9 months, swollen, her eyes moving over every face in the room with an unnerving deliberateness, as if she were tallying debts. She spoke when spoken to. She accepted food and water, and the rough charity of people who were risking their necks by keeping her. But the women who cared for her in those early days noticed something they discussed only in whispers. Pressed close together in back rooms with the doors shut, Ruth never looked surprised. Not once. Not when strangers entered, not when news arrived, not when a violent winter storm buried the county under 2 feet of silence. She received every development with the patience of someone who had already lived through it and simply had to wait for everyone else to catch up. She would tell people things, quietly, without malice, but without mercy either. She told Martha Whitmore that the man who delivered supplies the previous Tuesday was not who he claimed to be, that his name was false, that Lancaster had never been his home, and that he had asked him many questions about where the floor sounded hollow. Martha had dismissed this. 2 days later, the man was exposed as an informant sniffing around on behalf of the Garrett brothers, professional slave catchers who operated in the region with the gleeful brutality of men who understood that the law had recently been rewritten in their favor. Ruth had known. Ruth had always known. And she had told them, and it had cost them nothing but discomfort to believe her, and they had chosen discomfort instead. The night the boys were born, the temperature had dropped to something that felt punitive. The Garrett brothers were riding toward Cedar Mills with 6 men, 3 dogs, and precise intelligence about the basement hidden beneath the meeting house floor. Someone had talked. The Underground Railroad station that Elder Samuel Whitmore had operated for 8 years, that hidden room dug by hand in secret increments over long terrified months, was known. Joshua, a man Samuel had helped before, burst through the door with frost in his beard and panic doing ugly things to his face. He told them what was coming. He told them the dogs knew the scent. He told them they had maybe 2 hours, probably less. And from beneath the floorboards, as if summoned by the word less, came the sound of Ruth beginning to die by degrees in the process of giving life. Martha descended into the basement expecting crisis and found something worse. Calm. Ruth lay on the straw mattress with her hands folded over her stomach, her eyes closed, her breathing so measured it sounded rehearsed. The contractions were moving through her body with no apparent acknowledgement from her. She wasn't suppressing pain. She seemed simply absent from it, as if she had stepped somewhere else, inside herself, and left only the mechanical work of birth continuing in her absence. Martha pressed her ear to Ruth's belly the way midwives had done for centuries, listening for what she could hear, and Ruth opened her eyes and said, without being asked, 3 boys. Then she said, "They've been waiting for tonight." Martha did not have time to be frightened by this, because the first boy arrived before she could formulate a response. He came in complete silence. No cry, no sound at all from the infant, who was already breathing by the time Martha's hands closed around him, his eyes open and fully alert, moving around the room with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. The second followed minutes later, identically silent, identically awake. The third completed what Martha would later describe, in the private journal she hid in a box under floorboards of her own, as the most unnatural natural event she had ever witnessed. 3 boys, born in a basement below a meeting house, born into the immediate threat of discovery, born breathing and watching and utterly, terrifyingly quiet. Above them, the Garrett brothers walked the floorboards for 3 hours, heavy boots on old wood, directly over 3 newborn infants. The dogs scratched and whined at the seams between planks. Men with guns and legal authority moved through every room. At one point, a man stood with his full weight on the trapdoor itself, and the boys below, minutes old, with no possible understanding of consequence, did not make a sound. They lay in their mother's arms while she whispered to them in something that was not quite language, something that moved like water over stone, rhythmic and continuous and deeply wrong in a way Martha could not articulate except to write later that it sounded older in English. Older than anything I know the name of. The searchers found nothing. They left cursing, and the moment their horses faded into the dark, all three boys began to cry, in perfect unison, a single blended sound, like one voice split into three mouths. Ruth died within the hour. The bleeding was the kind that does not negotiate. Martha worked until there was nothing left to work with, and Ruth's last words were delivered with the composed specificity of someone settling an account. They'll know things. They'll always know. Take care of them, but remember they're not like other children. She was right, and the community of Cedar Mills would spend the next several years understanding exactly what she meant by that, and wishing they didn't. The boys were named Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac, and they grew the way unusual things grow when surrounded by ordinary ones, visibly wrong in ways that are hard to point to directly. At 6 months, all three would turn their heads simultaneously toward empty doorways. Always doorways where someone upset or hiding something would appear, sometimes minutes later, as if the boys had glimpsed the shape of the future and were simply waiting for it to fill in. By their first birthday, they had developed an absolute intolerance for dishonesty that operated below the threshold of language. Adults who lied in their presence about anything, even small things, even the kind of social frictions that grease ordinary life, found the boys going rigid, turning away, refusing eye contact with a finality that felt like judgment. Children who encountered them at this age stopped wanting to visit. Adults endured their company the way you endure the company of someone who you know has read your mail. The worst part, the part that made even their most devoted caregivers feel a creeping wrongness in their chests, was what happened when the boys detected something genuinely dark. A traveling merchant named Thompson stopped at the meeting house, and the triplets couldn't eat or sleep for the entirety of his visit. Agitated in the particular way of creatures that sense something is deeply wrong without having the vocabulary to name it. 2 weeks later, Thompson was arrested for murdering his business partner, whose body had been concealed in his wagon during the entire visit to Cedar Mills. He both had known, they had known the whole time, and they had been unable to communicate it, and they had suffered through every moment of his proximity. This is the detail that most people gloss over when they find the story interesting. It was not a gift that brought them joy, it was a wound that never closed. The knowing look appeared around age 3. All three would turn at the same moment, those dark eyes settling on whoever had attracted their attention, and the whispering would begin, that same flowing sound from their birth, private and liquid and shared only between the three of them. The effect on adults was described consistently as the sensation of being read, of having something private extracted without consent. Even honest people hated it. Even people with nothing to hide found their stomachs dropping when the boys turned. Their utility to the Underground Railroad was profound and horrible in equal measure. Word spread through the network. Freedom seekers asked to be routed through Cedar Mills because the triplets were a guarantee, not of safety exactly, but of truth. If the boys were calm, you were among people who meant what they said. If the boys went still and their eyes moved to someone in the group, that person was removed from the station, and the route was changed and no further explanation was offered. Over 3 years, the triplets identified 7 infiltrators. Samuel Whitmore found himself relying on children for intelligence that would have got his entire congregation hanged, and he did it because there was no alternative and because the boys were never wrong. But their range expanded. Their sensitivity deepened. At 4 years old, they began responding to things happening dozens of miles away. A morning of inconsolable screaming, all three in unison, 6 hours of it, a sound that Martha described as grief expressed without understanding why it had come, and 2 days later, news arrived that 11 freedom seekers, including 3 children, had been captured 40 miles south. The timing was precise. The match was unmistakable. This happened again, and the pattern became impossible to argue away. The boys could feel people being hunted. They could feel the specific electromagnetic signature, though no one had that language yet, of betrayal and mortal terror occurring at a distance. Dr. Harrison measured them during one of these episodes and found their pulse rates synchronized, their body temperatures dropped, their brain activity elevated in ways he had no framework to explain. He wrote to a colleague that he was either witnessing the emergence of a sensory capability unknown to medicine or he was being deceived by children in a manner he could not account for. He was not being deceived. The Brennan girl, 16, missing 3 months, a family arriving in Cedar Mills with nothing left but the rumor that 3 children in Ohio could find the lost. Samuel tried to refuse. The triplets approached the mother on their own. Isaac pointed southeast toward the river and said, "She's scared, but she's alive. The man who took her isn't who he said he was." Authorities found Mary Brennan locked in a cellar near Chillicothe alongside the other kidnapped women. The man who had them had posed as a preacher. He had been planning to sell them south. The triplets had known in the time it took Isaac to point. The prediction of Thomas Caldwell's death, a young soldier, traveling home on leave, laughing at the warning, came and went with the mechanical accuracy of something that did not care whether it was believed. He was shot and robbed by a man from his own unit who had arranged to travel part of the way with him, exactly as described, 3 days later, near a river crossing, exactly as specified. The community stopped finding this remarkable in the way people stop finding remarkable what happens with sufficient regularity. It simply became the texture of life in Cedar Mills, which was itself becoming a strange and heavy place to live. Then came James Morrison. Morrison was trusted. Morrison had guided hundreds of people to freedom over a decade of Underground Railroad work. He arrived one evening with 12 freedom seekers, men and women and children, all of them exhausted and frightened in the ordinary way of people who had been running. And the triplets, the moment Morrison walked through the door, began screaming. Not crying, not whimpering. Screaming, primal, animal, the sound of something that has looked at what is coming and cannot make the rest of the world look fast enough. They pointed at Morrison, and they said, "Death, he brings death, so much death," and they refused to stop and they refused to enter the basement and they would not be consoled. Samuel Whitmore sent Morrison on. He had known this man for years. He could not turn away 12 desperate people based on the distress of children. However extraordinary those children had proven themselves, he sent 2 men to follow at a distance, as a compromise, as a way of telling himself he had done something. Near Miller's Creek, in a clearing in the dark, Morrison called out. Armed men came out of the trees. 7 people died, including 2 children. The other 5 were taken back to Kentucky in chains. Morrison collected his payment and walked away, and the 2 men Samuel had sent watched all of it from too far away to change any of it. 7 people, 2 of them children, and 3 8-year-old boys had told Samuel exactly what would happen, and he had decided that his judgment, his years of experience, his long friendship with the man who was a traitor, outweighed what they could see. Isaac's response when he heard the news: "People never listen. They never want to believe what we can see. They think we're just children, but we've seen more death than anyone in this room." The federal marshals came in the winter of 1863. Someone in the military hierarchy had learned what the boys could do and concluded they would be useful for interrogating Confederate prisoners, detecting spies, extracting truth from people who didn't want to get it. The boys had sensed them coming before dawn. When Samuel found them, they were packed. Caleb explained that the men coming didn't want to study them. They wanted to open them up and see how they worked, and when they were finished they would come for the children the triplets would eventually have, and the children after that, and on down through the generations, until whatever was strange and valuable had been fully extracted and catalogued and weaponized. Ezra said, "We've seen the future they want to make. We won't be part of it." They were 8 years old. They walked into the Ohio wilderness 3 hours before the marshals arrived, and they were never found, and no record of their passing survived except in the careful journals of Martha Whitmore, hidden under her own floors, the way every true thing in that era was hidden, from the law, from the hungry, from people who would use the truth against you. What happened to them after is pieced together from documents found in 2003 during the renovation of a farmhouse in southeastern Ohio. A letter in 3 handwritings, signed the children of Cedar Mills, containing genealogical records and predictions, specific dates, specific locations, for events decades distant. Both world wars, the atomic test site, the moon landing, dozens of others, all come to pass, all documented, all described with the calm particularity of people reporting what they have already seen. The letter ended, "We are still here. We have grown in number and in ability with each passing generation. The time is coming when humanity will need what we carry. Until then, we remain hidden. We remember who helped us and who tried to use us. That knowledge has been passed down. It will continue to be passed down. We will be ready when the world finally deserves to know what we are." February 23, 2024, the 168th anniversary of the birth. More than 50 people gathered at an address included with the letter. Researchers, descendants of Underground Railroad participants, individuals who claimed abilities consistent with what the triplets had demonstrated as children. What happened there is not publicly known. Those who attended have not spoken. No record exists. But, in the months since, several of those attendees have begun working together on cold cases, on missing persons, on criminal investigations that had stalled for years and then, abruptly, didn't. Somewhere in Ohio, and elsewhere, people who can feel the electromagnetic shape of a lie are going about their days. Most of them don't know what they are. Some of them do. And somewhere in that number, if the letter is to be believed, are the direct descendants of 3 boys born in a basement in 1856, born silent, born watching, born into a world that was not ready for them and has had 160 years to prepare. It hasn't.